African talent is everywhere in European football, from Drogba to Eto'o, from Salah to Mané, from Osimhen to Hakimi. African stars have become kings in London, Paris, Milan, Munich, and Madrid. They win Champions League trophies, they carry some of the biggest clubs on earth. They become global icons, but when the World Cup starts, the story changes. Why has a continent that produces this much football greatness never touched a men's World Cup trophy? And until Morocco's historic run in 2022, why had no African team even reached the semi-final? Every 4 years, the same lazy explanation returns. They are too emotional, they lack discipline, they don't have the tactics. But those answers are too easy, because if African players lack quality, they will not be dominating European leagues, they will not be leading Champions League clubs, they will not be some of the most wanted players in world football. So the real question is not, can Africa produce great players? That answer is obvious. The real question is, why does African football keep producing world-class stars but not World Cup winning teams? Because at the World Cup, talent is only the beginning. A great player can win a moment, but a great system can win a tournament. And that is where the real story begins. Because while the world watches the players, the real game is often being won or lost in places fans rarely see. Federation offices, training centers, youth academies, medical rooms, travel plans, scouting networks, and decisions made years before the first ball is kicked. And that is the hidden battle, not talent versus no talent, but talent versus structure. You can see it in the way African football connects to the global market. African players are scouted early, signed young, developed abroad, sold for millions, and celebrated across the world. But too often, the biggest rewards of that talent do not flow back into African football itself. The player leaves, the value grows somewhere else. The finished product becomes a star in Europe, while the foundation back home does not always get stronger. Think about what that means. The continent produces the raw material, but too often the refining happens somewhere else. And that is the difference between producing stars and building a national team strong enough to win 7 games at a World Cup. Because the World Cup does not reward highlight reels, it rewards preparation, depth, patterns, recovery, experience, and federations that know what they're doing. That is why the same football powers keep appearing near the end. Brazil, Germany, Argentina, France, Italy, Spain. They do not always have perfect teams, but they have systems that survive bad generations, bad coaches, and bad tournaments. Africa has often had the players, what it has lacked too often is the machine around them. And that problem started long before kickoff. In the 1960s, Africa was not given a fair path into the World Cup. For the 1966 tournament, Africa was not given a guaranteed place at the finals. African teams could win through their own qualifying rounds and still be forced into a final playoff against the winner from Asia and Oceania. And one final place. For 3 regions, no guaranteed African team. African nations saw that as disrespectful and unfair, so all 15 African teams boycotted the qualifiers. And that boycott matters because while Europe and South America were building generations of World Cup experience, Africa was still fighting for basic recognition. World Cup experience compounds. You learn how to travel, how to recover, how to manage pressure, how to prepare players who already understand what the tournament feels like before they arrive. But if you spend decades fighting just to enter the room, you lose more than matches. You lose time, you lose rhythm, you lose institutional memory. Even after Africa gained more representation, the imbalance had already shaped generations. By 2022, Africa had 5 guaranteed places, and for 2026, that expanded to 9 guaranteed places, with a playoff route for a possible 10th. That is progress, but more spots alone do not build champions. Access gets you into the tournament, systems help you survive it. And this is where the boring stuff becomes the real story. Not the goals, not the celebrations, not the viral clips, the boring stuff. Pitches, academies, youth leagues, coach education, medical care, analyst teams, travel planning, stable federations. This is the part fans rarely see, but this is where the World Cups are often won before the tournament even starts. In 2024, the problem was still visible. 17 of 43 African countries scheduled to host World Cup qualifiers were forced to pay away from home or at a neutral venues because their facilities were not up to standard. Imagine trying to qualify for the biggest tournament on earth, but you cannot even play your home game at home. This is not just inconvenience, this is a competitive disadvantage. Money lost, atmosphere lost, pressure removed from the opponent, home advantage taken away. Now compare that with Morocco. Morocco did not just wake up in 2022 and accidentally become dangerous. In 2010, the Mohamed V Football Academy opened as part of a bigger effort to modernize Moroccan football development. It had lodging, classrooms, training facilities, medical support, and a clear purpose to develop footballs inside a real structure. Years later, Morocco's rise started to make more sense. Their youth development improved, their infrastructure improved, their scouting improved, their identity became clearer. And then in Qatar, the world called it a miracle, but Morocco knew something the world was missing. This was not just emotion, not just passion, not just one lucky golden generation. This was years of planning. They offended like a team. They suffered like a team. They knew exactly who they were. And when they beat Spain, then Portugal, it felt shocking, but it was not random. Morocco was showing Africa another path, not magic, a project, not luck, a plan, not just talent, a system. And that is the part every African nation has to confront. The World Cup is not a test of who can produce brilliance once. It is a test of who can make brilliance repeatable. But even when the talent is there, and even when the plan starts forming, another problem can break everything: instability. Fans see the players, they see the jersey, they hear the anthem, but behind the scenes, a national team could be fighting chaos before the first match even begins. Federation disputes, late coaching changes, poor planning, unpaid bonuses, bad facilities, short camps, canceled friendlies, travel issues, political interference. These things sound small from the outside, but at the World Cup, small things become huge. Because one mistake can end a tournament, one tired leg can lose a match, one confused team can undo 4 years of work. And sometimes this chaos becomes impossible to hide. At the 2014 World Cup, Ghana was not just fighting opponents on the pitch, they were fighting a bonus dispute behind the scenes. It got so serious that Ghana's government flew around $3 million in cash to Brazil to settle unpaid player bonuses. Think about that. You're at the World Cup, the entire planet is watching. Every detail matters: sleep, recovery, focus, training, team unity. And instead of preparing like a machine, your camp is dealing with cash bonuses, politics, and distraction. That does not mean Ghana lacked talent. Ghana had talent, but talent forced to live inside chaos eventually reaches a limit. Preparation windows matter too. Ahead of the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations, FIFA shortened the mandatory player release period. Some teams were left with only days to gather their foreign-based players, cancel friendlies, and prepare for a major tournament. Days to build rhythm, days to build chemistry, days to recover, travel, and create a tactical identity. That is not how tournament machines are built. That is how talented teams are forced to improvise. And at the highest level, improvisation usually has a limit. That is why African teams can look brilliant in one tournament and disjointed in the next. The talent is real, the continuity is not always there. And yet, despite all of this, Africa has come close, very close. Cameroon in 1990 was the first major warning. They beat defending champions Argentina. They beat Colombia. They became the first African team to reach a World Cup quarterfinal. Then they pushed England into extra time before losing 3-2. That run was not a fluke, it was a message. Africa had arrived. Senegal made that message louder in 2002. On their World Cup debut, they beat defending champions France. A team from Africa waltzed onto the biggest stage in football and looked like it belonged there. Senegal reached the quarterfinals, but again, the semifinal line stayed out of reach. Then came Ghana in 2010, maybe the most painful night in African football history. A handball on the line, a penalty in the final seconds. Asamoah Gyan steps up, the ball hits the crossbar, then Uruguay win the shootout. Ghana were seconds from becoming the first African team to reach a World Cup semifinal. Seconds. That moment showed the truth. The gap was no longer about whether African teams had talent. The gap was margins, tiny margins, cruel margins, tournament margins, margins created by preparation, depth, experience, structure, and calm under pressure. And then Morocco finally broke the wall in 2022. Spain went out. Portugal went out. History was made. The first African and Arab team in a World Cup semifinal. But Morocco's greatest achievement was not just reaching the semifinal. It was proving that an African team could win through structure, discipline, identity, and planning. They defended together. They suffered together. They trusted the system. And for the first time, the old question changed. It was no longer, can Africa reach this level? Morocco had answered that. The new question became, who can repeat it? So why do African teams struggle in the World Cup? Not because Africa lacks talent. Africa has never lacked talent. The continent has produced genius after genius, wingers who terrify defenders, midfielders who control Europe's biggest games, strikers who become legends far from home. But the World Cup asked for something more cruel than talent. It asked for structure, depth, continuity, preparation, stability. It asked for a country to be ready, not just for one great match, but for 7. And that is the real wall African football has been trying to break. Cameroon cracked it, Senegal shook it, Ghana came within inches of smashing it, Morocco finally broke through it. And now, the old question may be changing. Maybe the question is no longer why has Africa never won the World Cup? Maybe the better question is, which African nation will be the first to build a machine strong enough to carry that dream all the way? Because Africa does not need permission to believe anymore. The talent has always been there. Now the mission is to build something powerful enough to match it.